You're 12, maybe 13. The steward called for you after vespers, when the halls had gone quiet and the older boys had begun to whisper nervously behind their hands. You were told to bathe, to brush your hair flat, to wear the blue velvet doublet, not the rough one, the fine one, the one they say for ceremonies or funerals. You obeyed. You always do. Now you stand outside the king's private chamber. 2 guards flank the door. Neither looks at you. You can hear the soft hiss of a brazier inside, the wet snap of burning myrrh, the clink of a goblet touching stone. No voices, no footsteps, just heat, scent, and breath. The steward knocks once and then steps back. The door opens. You enter alone. The room is dark, not from lack of candles, there are plenty, but from the thickness of the air, heavy with smoke, like a church after too many masses. The tapestries seem to sag. The walls sweat. The king sits near the hearth in a wide chair that looks more like a throne than it should. He does not rise. You see him first in silhouette. The fire lights the lower half of his face, catching on the sag of his jowls and the shine of moisture clinging to his lip. His eyes are shadowed. His robe is open at the collar, chest bare, skin glistening. He stares at you for too long. Then he lifts his hand. Come closer. Your feet move before you decide to move them. As you approach, you notice the table beside him. 3 goblets, a dish of sugared almonds, a carved figurine of a kneeling boy. The statue is small, smooth, polished at the shoulders where fingers have lingered. One of the goblets is full, the other 2 are empty. The room smells of wine, of candle wax, and something else, something coppery, sickly sweet, like a wound dressed in perfume. He gestures to the stool. Sit. You sit. He looks at you, not your face, your hands, your posture, the slope of your shoulders. He notices everything. You try not to shiver. You try not to breathe too loud. You're the one who recites Latin cleanly, he says. Your voice is steady. You nod. He reaches for the almond dish but doesn't eat. Do you pray? He asks. You nod again. To whom? You hesitate. Then, Saint. Michael? He smiles, or something like it. Good. He fought devils. You'll need him. He pours wine into the second goblet and pushes it toward you. You don't touch it. Not yet. He drinks from his own, long and slow. His hand trembles slightly. You don't know if it's the wine or the sickness. You've heard stories about his legs, about the way his skin breaks open at the knees, about the foulness of the sores and the way his servants leave linens outside his door instead of entering to change them. You've heard that he doesn't sleep well, that he sees ghosts now, that he mutters to statues and slaps pages who speak too loudly. But you've also heard about the other boys, the ones summoned after sundown. They don't talk afterward, or they vanish. Sometimes they're given horses, coins, silk gloves. Sometimes they're sent to monasteries. One boy, Thomas, returned to the lower kitchens with his hair shorn and a limp that made the other squires look away. No one says what happens in this room. You don't ask. The king leans back in his chair. He looks at you again. Longer this time. You look like someone I knew, he says. Long ago. You wait. The fire crackles. Somewhere above you the rafters creak. He lifts the carved boy from the table and rolls it between his fingers. They used to call me a lion, he says. I could break a man's back with one blow, ride 3 days without rest. I was never afraid of anything. He sets the figurine down and leans forward. But lions die too, in corners, in silence. You nod, unsure if you should speak. Then he says something you weren't prepared for. Would you sing for me? You freeze. No hymns. Not tonight. Something small. A child's tune. You remember any? Your throat tightens. You nod again. You begin to sing. Your voice is soft. It shakes at first, then steadies. The words are in Norman French. A lullaby your nurse taught you. Something about a swan and a cradle. You keep your eyes fixed on the table. When you finish, the room is silent. He hasn't moved. You glance up. His eyes are wet. "Leave the door open," he says. "Tell them to send Thomas." Your breath catches. Thomas was gone. Months now. You stand. He doesn't look at you again. You walk backward as you were taught. You bow before the threshold. You don't breathe until the door closes. Outside, the guards still don't speak. You're shaking. You don't know why. Years later, they will write about Henry II as a king of ambition, a builder of empires, a man who ruled with iron and wit. But not about the pages, not about the closed rooms, not about the silence, and never about why his last years were spent surrounded not by knights or nobles or sons, but by boys who were always quiet and always alone. Before Henry was a king, he was a boy without a place. He was born into war. His mother, Matilda, was too busy trying to reclaim the English crown to hold him often. When she did visit, she brought more pressure than comfort. She called him "my son, the prince," before he could walk. He was not kissed, he was inspected. His father, Geoffrey Plantagenet, ruled Anjou with a knight's discipline and a soldier's silence. Geoffrey did not raise Henry. He assigned that task to squires and retainers, older boys and younger men trained to obey, protect, and shape. And so Henry grew up in armouries and chapels, not nurseries. He heard stories of conquest before lullabies. He learned to ride before he learned to write. But what marked him most was the way men surrounded him. Always nearby, always touching, always watching. They dressed him in chainmail when it was too heavy. They bathed him when he was old enough to resist. They called him young lord, my lion cub, little conqueror. He came to believe that love sounded like instruction, that affection was control. He learned that younger boys listened to him, obeyed, admired. At court, pages followed him like shadows. He would choose one, then another. He liked boys who were quiet, boys who didn't ask questions, boys who stared at him like he was something bigger than human, something royal. He began giving them commands, innocent ones at first. "Bring me water. Polish this for me. Sit here while I read." The older knights thought it charming. But over time the commands grew stranger. "Don't speak unless I say so. Let me braid your hair. Let me watch while you pray. And always don't tell anyone." There was no scandal, no violation. Just a boy rehearsing power. A boy who had never been held without being corrected. A boy who felt safest when someone smaller stood beneath him and said, "Yes, my lord." Matilda saw none of this. She had wars to plan. Geoffrey, when he did visit, only asked if the boy could ride and strike. Henry could, but he also watched. He watched how the soldiers joked when the squires blushed. He watched how the priests looked too long at the altar boys. He watched how older men touched the shoulders of younger ones, firm, guiding, possessive. He learned that courtly love was a game played in shadows, that purity was something taught and then broken and then expected to return. At age 10, he caught one of his retainers weeping after an older knight had cornered him. The boy tried to hide it, said he had fallen. Henry didn't ask questions, but the next day he ordered that knight sent back to Anjou. No explanation. The court was confused. Some admired his decisiveness. Others thought he was just mimicking his mother. But something had shifted. Henry wasn't angry. He was curious. He began to test things. He asked his pages what they feared. He made them share secrets. He kept them close, then sent them away, then summoned them again. They obeyed, because he was kind, because he was noble, because he never crossed a line they could name, only walked circles around it. By adolescence he had dozens of boys in his orbit. He knew their names, their habits, their families. But none of them truly knew him. He learned to smile without warmth, to praise without meaning, to make a boy feel chosen, and then discard him like a page from a ledger. It wasn't lust. Not yet. It was something colder, something quieter. Control wrapped in affection, innocence as a mirror, power without consequence. The court celebrated his charisma. his ability to charm, to inspire. But underneath, something else was taking root. A belief that love meant possession, that trust came with silence, that affection was safest when unreturned. This was the foundation. Not yet an obsession, but the shape of it was already there. They called them the Lilies, boys between 10 and 14, always dressed in cream or pale blue, soft curls brushed until they shone. They moved quietly, spoke only when spoken to, walked in formation behind the king like petals floating in his wake. Contemporaries admired them openly. "A garden of lilies around the lion," one French courtier wrote after visiting Chinon. Softness placed at the feet of steel. At Henry II's court, page boys were more than decoration. They were a system, a ritual, a statement. Other kings had pages, trained for knighthood, trusted with small duties, educated in chivalry. But Henry's pages were something else, younger, quieter, chosen less for lineage and more for their silence. His chancellor's records show rotating lists of boys brought in from noble families across Normandy, Anjou and Aquitaine. Many had no brothers, no military future. They were decorative, intelligent, beautiful, and temporary. Some stayed for weeks, others months. Few lasted longer. They were housed in a special wing, eastern quarters with separate entrances, finer food, constant supervision. Not by guards, but by older pages nearing retirement. These attendants were loyal, discreet, and well paid. They made sure the boys were clean, polished, presentable, no bruises, no dirt, no questions. Each morning, they were assigned one of 3 tasks. One would serve the king his morning wash. One would accompany him during prayers. One would sit near his feet during council meetings, silent and still. The rotation changed daily, but always, Henry chose which boy performed each task. His word was final. The boys were never allowed in groups larger than 3. They were not permitted to speak privately with knights. Their letters were read before being sent home. They were told they were special, that serving the king was an honour, and some believed it. For a boy raised on stories of Arthur and Charlemagne, proximity to the king was intoxicating. To be called into his chamber, to be told your voice soothed him, to be praised for your stillness, it felt like being chosen by God, but others knew better. They flinched when summoned, avoided each other's eyes, tried not to smile too brightly when near him, afraid they might be called back later. At night the rules changed. Henry often dismissed his guards before sunset. He preferred to walk the halls alone, sometimes barefoot, sometimes muttering. Occasionally he would send for a page. The summons were never written. It came through a whisper, passed from steward to attendant to boy. "You're wanted." No reason, no destination. Just a nod toward the corridor that led to his chamber. The boys obeyed. Because they had no reason not to. Because disobedience wasn't punished, but it was remembered. And when they returned, if they returned, they said nothing. Their faces were unreadable. Their steps are slower. Their laughter is quieter. No one asked where they had been. Not the priests, not the knights, not even the other boys, because everyone had seen it. A boy called to the chamber, then reassigned to the stables the next morning. Another sent home early, his name crossed from the rolls. One, it was whispered, was sent to a monastery so remote it did not appear on any map. Henry never spoke of them, but he remembered. He remembered which ones held eye contact, which ones wept, which ones trembled. He favoured the quiet ones, the ones who obeyed before being asked. The cult of the page boys became a kind of secret language. Servants learned to walk differently when near them. Ministers lowered their voices. Even the Queen refused to enter certain corridors during their appointed hours, and Henry never looked more at ease than when surrounded by them. He stroked their hair during banquets, held their chins when they spoke, praised their innocence with words that felt like possession. It wasn't lust in the way people understood it. It was need for worship, for control, for purity he could own, then discard. And the boys, each in their turn, became vessels for that need. Some never spoke of it again, others carried it like a scar beneath their fine clothing. A few wrote letters, never sent, tucked into Bibles or under mattresses. Only fragments survive. I was called twice. The second time I prayed I would not wake. He smelled of wine and honey, but I could taste blood in my mouth. I said nothing, and that was why I was allowed to leave. Henry II built an empire with stone and sword, but in the quiet rooms of Chinon and Winchester, he built something else, a sanctuary of silence, a court of chosen boys, and behind every crown, a locked door. Thomas Becket knew how to listen. Before he was archbishop, before he became a martyr, he was a servant, a clever one, the kind who could read a room before stepping into it, the kind who understood when silence meant survival. He and Henry were inseparable once, not as equals, never that, but as something closer than friends, stranger than allies. Henry trusted him, with his words, his moods, his secrets. Becket held the keys to royal chambers. He handled the correspondence no one else was allowed to read. He passed through halls that others avoided, and when Henry disappeared into his private rooms with a page in tow, it was Becket who stood nearest the door. No one knows what he saw. But something changed. The years that followed saw a cooling, first of warmth, then of trust. Henry began to pull away, small gestures at first, fewer private meals, tighter control over access, orders delivered through intermediaries. Becket didn't confront him. He waited, watched, and it seems began to collect knowledge. When Henry raised him to Archbishop of Canterbury, many assumed it was a final act of loyalty. But Becket saw it for what it was, an exile in plain sight, a way to remove him from the rooms that mattered. Still, Becket refused to stay quiet. He challenged the king, not on policy, but on principle. He spoke, carefully, never openly, of moral rot at court, of unfit companionship, of intimacies that poison a kingdom, no names, no accusations. But Henry understood. Letters between nobles hint at heated exchanges. One courtier wrote that the king once gripped Becket by the robe and whispered, "Speak one word more and I'll dig your tongue from your skull." Another claimed Becket threatened to expose something unholy. They never said what. They didn't have to. In the years before Becket's murder, Henry's behaviour grew erratic. His page rotations doubled. Boys were moved through the court like coins through fingers. Quick, quiet, untraceable. Becket watched. Then he fled. When the knights came for him in Canterbury, he stood his ground. They struck his head until it split. Blood soaked the stones of the altar. Henry wept, publicly, violently. He tore his clothing. He fasted. He walked barefoot through the snow to Becket's tomb. He allowed the monks to whip him, 5 lashes for each of the assassins. But something else happened too. He replaced the lashes with silence. The pages returned in greater number. Their wing expanded, their quarters upgraded. A new bathhouse was added near the private chapel. No one else permitted entry. Whatever guilt he carried, it didn't lead to confession. It led to deeper concealment. Becket had known too much, and now Becket was gone. Some say Henry was broken by the murder. Others say he was freed. Freed from scrutiny. Freed from the only man who dared look too closely. The records from that year are strangely quiet on domestic matters. Ledgers thin, letters cautious. Ministers suddenly replaced without explanation. One monk from Canterbury, years later, scribbled a line in the margin of a homily. The archbishop tried to cauterize a wound. The wound bled him instead. Henry's affection for boys did not stop. It deepened. It became less about comfort, more about control. He was careful now. No more smiling in public. no more touches at banquets. But behind locked doors the same rituals played out, and Becket's shadow lingered, not because he had died, but because he had noticed. The summons always came after dark, not during feast hours or prayer, but in the space between, the quiet middle of the night when the castle felt half asleep and half awake. A steward would appear at the page boy's quarters, whisper a name, then vanish. No reasons were ever given, no refusals ever recorded. The boy would rise, dress quickly, and walk barefoot down the hall. They were never sent in pairs, not even the youngest. The routine was well known among the older pages. When a new boy arrived, he learned quickly: speak softly, bow low, keep your eyes down. Do not cry, do not ask questions, do not smile too brightly, or you might be summoned again. Those chosen often didn't return until dawn, and when they did, they were different. Some went straight to bed, fully clothed. Others knelt by their mattresses and whispered prayers with clenched fists. A few sat awake, staring at the wall as if waiting for something to be undone. They were given no duties the next morning, no breakfast, no questions. By midday they would be back to normal, almost. In the king's private chambers the nights followed a ritual. The boy would enter and be asked to perform small tasks: massage the king's shoulders, recite a passage from Virgil, sing a hymn, pour wine, not too quickly, never spill. Sometimes he would be told to play music, lute, pipe, even voice, sometimes just to sit. The king would not always speak. He might pace, he might weep, he might watch the fire for an hour and then dismiss the boy with a single nod. Other nights were worse. The king would reach for the boy's hand and hold it too long. He would ask about dreams, about family, about what made the boy afraid. He would praise the boy's stillness, his devotion, his body. He would say it quietly, calmly, as if speaking about art. But the message was clear. You are here because I chose you. You are loved because you are silent. You are safe because I have not broken you. Foreign visitors took note of it. An Italian emissary wrote, "The king's rooms glow with oil lamps long after midnight. Small shadows pass through his door but never emerge until morning. It is as if he draws light from distance." A German knight remarked, "The boy servants look like saints painted on altarpieces, but their eyes are hollow." No one spoke openly, but everyone knew. Even the monks noticed. One chronicler from Glastonbury wrote in the margins of a sermon manuscript, never meant for public eyes, "I heard the child sob in the corridor. I knew not his name, only that he served wine to the king the night before. His voice cracked when he asked if angels knew silence." Another monk recorded a strange confession from a boy sent to the cloisters after royal service. He said the king's touch was not cruel, only cold, only slow, like someone trying to remember love from a distance. But those records were hidden. Most were destroyed. Pages who aged out of favour were either given small titles or sent to monasteries. Their stories vanished. Their memories were buried beneath layers of obedience and silence. And for the boys still in service, the lesson was simple: be quiet, be perfect, be useful. And when the door closes behind you, never speak of what it means to be touched, praised, and then forgotten. Eleanor of Aquitaine was no fool. She had ruled 2 kingdoms, crossed continents, and survived imprisonment. She had outlived wars, kings, and rumours. Her brilliance was legendary. Her letters, sharp and elegant. Her presence, undeniable. And still, she said nothing. Not about the boys, not about the corridors after dark, not about what happened behind the king's sealed doors. She knew. Of course she did. The queen was not a guest in her husband's court. She was its architect. She arranged marriages, managed estates, and filled abbeys with her own chosen daughters of nobility. Nothing moved without her notice. And yet, when it came to the page boys, she was silent. She never commented on the wing added near the king's chapel, even when it meant displacing 2 noble families' suites. She never questioned the arrival of unusually young boys from Aquitaine, Brittany or Normandy. Boys with no military prospects, no family connections, only beauty. She never asked why they left so suddenly, and she never slept at Chinon. Not once in her final years as queen did she stay in the same castle while Henry held court there. She chose Poitiers, or Fontevraud, or the outer reaches of Anjou. She travelled constantly, though she claimed age worried her. She preferred to write letters, hold salons and govern from a distance. But distance was the point. In the archives of a convent in Toulouse, there is a single letter, unsigned, undated, but written in Eleanor's unmistakable hand. He surrounds himself with waxen faces. They speak with small voices and walk as if hollowed from within. I do not speak of it. To name the thing would be to bring it into the daylight, and daylight has not helped before. It is not clear whom she was writing to. Possibly a lady in waiting. Possibly her daughter. What is clear is that she had made a decision. Silence for safety. Not her own, but her son's. Henry's rage was known, his punishment swift. He struck courtiers for mild offences, exiled friends, disinherited cousins. The only line he never crossed was with his sons, and Eleanor used that line like a shield. She kept the boys away from Chinon when they were young. She sent them to different tutors, different castles. When Henry summoned Richard, she sent John. When he asked for Geoffrey, she delayed. She filled their hours with falconry, Latin, horseback. She wrote letters reminding them of honour, legacy, dignity. She made them sharp and proud and distant, like her. But even she could not protect them forever. There are traces, small ones, in the letters exchanged between noblewomen, mentions of the second household, the evening favourites, the soft parade. Phrases like, "He is of age now, and the Queen sends him west." She saw him picked from the dining hall and said nothing. "I only poured more wine." She no longer smiles during prayers. Eleanor knew, everyone knew, but she played the game better than most. She leveraged her silence into survival. Her distance is controlled. She did not confront. She endured. Some believe she even selected boys herself, names whispered through ladies in waiting, chosen from lesser families unlikely to resist. A sort of damage control. If he must take it, let him take it carefully. There is no proof, only a pattern. Boys from her own duchy sent in years when her political position was weakest. Boys were replaced quickly after rumours began. Boys whose families were later rewarded with land, titles, favour, not as gifts, as payment. She never said a word. In her later years, after Henry's death, she took the veil at Fontevraud Abbey. Visitors say she spent hours in silence, alone in the chapel, lips moving but making no sound. She never wrote about Chinon. She never mentioned the page boys, but she also never forgave her husband. Not truly. Not for the prison, not for the pain, and maybe not for the thing she saw and let happen, again and again in the name of duty. A queen's silence is not emptiness. It is a calculation, and Eleanor calculated that some truths were more dangerous than sin. His name is gone, not erased, just never written clearly to begin with. In court records he appears once, referred to only as le garçon de chambre. In a fragment of a French poem found decades later in the margins of a noblewoman's psalter, he's called the boy who bit the lion. What's left is mostly rumour, mostly shadow. But something happened. He was not like the others. He entered court at 14, older than most page boys, broad-shouldered, unusually fluent in Latin. The steward noted his posture, too upright, too confident. But the king noticed something else. His eyes. They didn't lower. On the second day the boy was summoned to serve wine during the king's evening rest. He went. He poured. He waited. When told to kneel, he didn't. Henry reportedly laughed. The third day the boy was asked to recite Virgil. He did, flawlessly. The king asked him to repeat it, Slower, he did not. By the end of the week, the boy had been summoned 4 times. Each time he returned untouched, unswapped, unsilenced. Other pages began to whisper. Something wasn't working. Something was wrong. Then came the night. No record describes what happened fully. But a monk at the Abbey of Saint-Jean later wrote, in cramped and hurried Latin, "The boy did not obey. He struck the hand that held him. He ran, down corridors, through kitchens, out into the snow without a cloak or shoes. Guards caught him near the river. He was returned, flogged behind closed doors. Witnesses heard nothing. The next morning he was gone. For 2 years no one knew where he had gone. Then a single document emerged, buried inside a vellum-bound prayer book at a remote monastery in the mountains of Auvergne. At first glance it looked like marginalia, notes about scripture, a few psalms. But between those lines, something else was hidden. A voice. He does not want to touch. He wants to surrender. He stares as if trying to extract something from the face. Purity, fear, silence. He asks to be praised not for being king but for being loved. And when you don't love him, he watches you harder. When I said no, he didn't rage. He wept. He needs the boy to yield, not to fight, not to speak, not to resist. I did not yield. The handwriting suggests the boy himself, or someone recording his words directly. The script is rushed in places, deliberate in others. Some passages are smudged with what appears to be wax or tears or both. It is not a confession. It is a record, a protest, a warning. The boy writes of the room, the smell of frankincense and blood. The questions Henry asked, "Do you fear me? Do you trust me? Do you love me?" He describes the king's face when those questions were met with silence. He turned to stone, the boy writes, as if I had killed something inside him. And yet, even in rejection, the king could not let go. The boy describes being followed, his transfer to the monastery brokered with gifts and threats, a promise that he would not speak again, a quiet bribe for a permanent silence. The monastery accepted him. He was renamed, reclothed, assigned to scribe duty. He copied psalms for 3 winters, then vanished. No one knows what happened next. He left no other writings. His name never appears again, not in royal rolls, not in church logs, not in burial records. It's as if someone ensured he would not exist. But the words remain, passed through hands, hidden in hymnals, scribbled anew by monks who believed the truth had weight. The poem that references him, the one in the noblewoman's psalter, is short, 4 lines. He would not kneel, he would not bow. He fled the lion's throne and left it cold. It doesn't name him, but it remembers him, because he did what no other boy had done. He said no. He didn't disappear into silence. He forced the king to see something that could not be consumed, a soul not available for possession, a body that would not break, and that broke something in return. By the end, Henry smelled like something already buried. His body betrayed him before his kingdom did. The ulcers began on his legs, flesh softening, splitting open, leaking fluid that no ointment could tame. The physicians tried poultices, prayers, wine-soaked compresses wrapped in velvet. Nothing worked. The stench became part of the palace. It clung to tapestries, leaked into corridors. Pages began walking with clothes pressed discreetly to their noses. Still, the king summoned them. Not directly now, his voice too hoarse, his body too weak. But the messages came, through stewards, through scribes, through chambermaids who had learned never to ask why a child was wanted after midnight. The boys came. They poured wine, read scripture aloud, sat at the foot of his bed while he muttered nonsense to the wall. They rubbed his swollen ankles with oil, always under watch. They waited as he asked them about their families, their fears, their dreams. Sometimes he wept and asked to be held. Sometimes he just stared at them as if they were mirrors. They never came back twice. Each morning the boy from the night before would be sent away, home, monastery, or posted to a distant estate, paid well, forgotten fast. The steward who managed these movements died with a locked drawer full of sealed parchments, discreet payments, instructions, changes to the rolls. No explanations, just names crossed out, replaced, deleted. No pattern, except that they were all young. By his final month, Henry was confined to a single chamber at Chinon, curtains drawn, candles are always lit. The smell of fever and rot soaked the linens faster than they could be changed. He stopped eating, refused prayers, spoke only to his carved boy. It was small, no larger than a fist. Smooth olive wood, polished thin at the shoulders, worn soft at the lips. Some said it was a relic. Others said it had been carved for him years ago, modelled after one of his favourites, a page who never returned home. He clutched it day and night. One monk tried to take it during a sponge bath. The king screamed. No one tried again. In his final hours, priests gathered to hear his confession. 3 waited by his bedside. One opened the Psalter. Another read softly from John. The third whispered, "Your soul awaits your words, sire." Henry said nothing. He looked at the carved figure in his hand. He breathed once sharply, then stopped. The room was cleared immediately. Servants stripped the bed. Attendants washed the body in silence. The carved boy was taken, no record remains of where. The pages were summoned, each one dismissed with coin, cloak, and the command never to return. No thanks, no farewells, just silence. The entire chamber was scrubbed with lye. Curtains burned, mattresses buried, floors scraped and recoated with lime. A priest walked the perimeter 3 times, sprinkling holy water and murmuring Latin benedictions like an exorcism. They tried to erase the smell. They could not. History says Henry II died a powerful king, a warrior broken by politics, a patriarch consumed by betrayal. But his rooms tell another story, of boys who learned to fear the sound of their own name, of rituals that blurred the line between worship and possession, of a man who built a sanctuary out of innocence and died clutching a ghost he could never control. No one wrote it down, not directly. The chronicles of Henry II speak of law, war, castles, and empire. They list his victories, his reforms, his sons, legitimate and not, his tomb, his triumphs, but not the boys, not the rooms, not the summons that came after dusk and left no witnesses. It's the silence that tells the story. Within a decade of Henry's death, something subtle shifted. New royal edicts limited the service of boys under 14. Page appointments required notarized approval from the Chancellor. Family members, usually fathers or uncles, had to remain in court during the boys' service. Old portraits were taken down. Inventories list them simply as removed, with no description of where they were placed or why. A wing at Chinon was sealed, its doors bricked over. Letters from that period show gaps, missing pages, broken wax seals, abrupt endings. One archivist recorded a shipment of royal correspondence marked sensitive for destruction. The laws changed quietly, the routines did not. But the court no longer spoke of the page boys with warmth. Now they were managed, monitored, made visible, and yet they still came, because kings still needed them, just not the way Henry did. He is remembered for many things: the Plantagenet legacy, the legal system, the strength of his armies, the iron will that forged a dynasty. But even in victory he was feared, not for the power he wielded in public, but for the power he kept hidden in private. And those who served him, those boys, never wrote memoirs, never stood trial, never told the truth. They couldn't. Because the truth was never spoken, only felt. In the silence of a corridor I walked alone, in the way servants avoided eye contact during feast hours, in the soft flinch of a boy asked to pour wine, Chinon still stands, the stones remain. Tourists pass through its halls, admiring the towers, the battlements, the view of the river. But beneath the castle, in corridors no longer marked on modern maps, the air still shifts strangely. One caretaker said the floors there feel colder. Another said the walls echo differently, like someone breathing just around the bend. It's a superstition maybe, or maybe not. Because silence leaves traces too, especially when it's layered over suffering. Henry's final act wasn't conquest. It was forgetting. He erased their names, but not the damage. And beneath all the glory carved into his tomb, there is something else. A hollow no inscription dares to fill.